You're looking to cut through the noise,
Correct.
get a real understanding of something complex, but, without having to wade through endless reports and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we're doing today. We're taking a hard look at a story that's, well, as strange as it is deeply unsettling. Marvin Heemeyer and the so-called Killdozer incident in Granby, Colorado.
Ah, yes. This is one of those stories that really sticks with you, precisely because it throws so much into question. What does it mean to feel wronged? What happens when that feeling boils over?
Right.
And, why does a story of such destruction end up with the central figure being seen as some kind of hero by certain people? It's a real head scratcher.
It truly is. The very
Yeah.
image, this homemade, heavily armored bulldozer just tearing through a town, it's almost cartoonish, yet the consequences were very real.
Mm-hmm.
So for you, we want to dissect this event. We need to understand what this Killdozer actually was, the almost unbelievable feat of engineering that went into building it.
Yeah, the construction itself is kind of mind-blowing. Yeah.
What pushed Heemeyer to such an extreme, and perhaps most troublingly, why his actions continue to find an audience, particularly within groups like the Boogaloo Bois.
To really grasp this, I think we have to start with the man himself. Marvin Heemeyer. Born 1951, grew up on a farm in South Dakota.
Okay.
He served as an Air Force technician, and it's worth noting, not in a combat role before becoming a welder. Seems like a pretty typical background, for a lot of folks.
Exactly. Then, in 1989, he moves to Grand Lake, Colorado. By all accounts, a skilled tradesman, someone who could clearly build things with his hands.
Right.
He was even known as a generous neighbor, involved in an avalanche rescue at one point. But there was another side to him, described as very private, fiercely independent. He was a single guy there, but apparently enjoyed taking newlyweds out snowmobiling. It's hard to reconcile that image with what eventually happened. What do you make of that contrast?
Well, it's fascinating how often these kinds of seemingly ordinary individuals can reach a breaking point. He moves to the neighboring town of Granby, buys a piece of land for, what was it, $42,000?
Yeah, something like that.
And opens a muffler repair shop. And he wasn't a recluse in Granby. Not initially. He actually got quite involved in local affairs. Big advocate for legalizing gambling.
Right, I read that. He had this idea of turning Granby into a kind of small-scale Las Vegas.
Yeah. Which, as you can imagine, in a small town, probably didn't sit well with everyone.
Definitely not. You had the established community, the local church. They likely weren't thrilled with that vision.
For sure. He even started his own newspaper, it seems, as a platform to push his ideas. And this is where the central conflict really begins to brew his opposition to the local concrete plant, Mountain Park Concrete, citing environmental concerns.
Okay, the concrete plant.
And this becomes the real crux of the matter. The concrete plant had plans to expand, and unfortunately for them, Heemeyer's muffler shop was right in the path of that expansion. The owner of the plant, Cody Doshef and Heemeyer, both seem to have been incredibly strong-willed individuals, ended up in this really protracted and bitter dispute over the property.
Now, this is where the narrative gets a bit murky, right? Different sides telling different stories.
Exactly. Doshef maintained that Heemeyer was asking for an outrageous sum of money for his property, eventually reaching, like, $1 million.
Wow.
But Heemeyer supporters claimed the offers from the concrete plant were insultingly low, almost dismissive. Regardless of the exact figures, it's clear this wasn't just a simple negotiation that went south. It became deeply personal.
Yeah, you can feel that.
Precisely. What's intriguing is the shift from a land dispute to what Heemeyer clearly perceived as a campaign of harassment directed at him.
Okay. Like what?
Well, he claimed his existing access road was deliberately blocked, and when he tried to get permission to build a new one, that was also denied. Then, a whole series of pressures seemed to come down on him, issues with his mortgage on his previous property in Grand Lake, visits from fire inspectors about code violations. Even the IRS got involved.
Oh, boy.
And then, of course, the fines started to accumulate.
Yeah, the $2,500 fine for having what was deemed junk auto parts on his property and not being connected to the town sewer system, that really seems to have been a flashpoint. But what's particularly galling is the claim that the concrete plant's own expansion was physically blocking his ability to connect to the sewer line.
Yeah, that detail is crucial. It really fuels this narrative of a lone individual being deliberately squeezed by a larger, more powerful entity.
He paid the fine, but he didn't do it quietly. He wrote "cowards" on the check. That speaks volumes, doesn't it?
It really does. It's those kinds of details that give you a sense of the mounting frustration and resentment he must have been feeling.
Definitely.
And then compounding all of this, Heemeyer's father passed away.
Oh, wow. The timing of that seems significant.
Very. While he was away for the funeral, his shop was reportedly sealed up and his utilities were shut off.
No, really.
Yeah. If you're already feeling like the world is against you, that kind of action, well, it could certainly be interpreted as a deliberate act of hostility, the final confirmation in his mind, perhaps, that the system was actively trying to crush him.
You can almost see how someone could reach that conclusion, however skewed.
So he then goes and buys this massive Komatsu D355A bulldozer at an auction in California.
The bulldozer, okay.
Initially, he apparently told people it was to build a new access road for himself. But then, according to the narrative, the local authorities also denied him permission for that.
It just keeps piling up. It almost sounds like every avenue he tried to pursue was being blocked.
Right, and it seems that's the point where his thinking really takes a dramatic turn. This refusal, combined with the sheer impracticality of trying to resell such a specialized and enormous piece of equipment.
Yeah, who's going to buy that?
Exactly. It seems to have been interpreted by Heemeyer not just as bureaucratic obstruction, but as something more significant, maybe even a sign, a push towards a more radical course of action. What else could explain what happened next?
Which leads us to this almost unbelievable chapter. He sells his Granby property,
Right.
but then negotiates a lease to rent back half of his old shop building. Tells the new owner he needs the space to clean some things out.
Clean some things out, yeah.
He then proceeds to build a dividing wall, changes the locks, and for the next year and a half, he undertakes this incredibly elaborate and secret project.
Right.
Right under everyone's noses.
It's just mind-boggling to think about. He even kept journals during this period.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and in them, he reportedly expressed his sheer astonishment that no one seemed to realize what he was doing inside that shop.
Wow.
He apparently came to believe that God or angels were somehow shielding his work, allowing him to complete it undetected. It really offers a chilling insight into his mindset, this feeling of being on some kind of divinely ordained mission.
That's deeply disturbing.
And what emerged from that shop was this truly monstrous machine he dubbed the MK tank, Marvin Komatsu tank.
MK tank.
He took this already massive, nearly 60-ton Komatsu D35A bulldozer and essentially encased it in layers of homemade armor plating.
Homemade armor. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about a composite armor, half-inch steel plates with thick concrete sandwiched in between. In some areas, this armor was reportedly up to a foot thick. The sheer scale of this undertaking, it's hard to even imagine.
A foot thick.
Yeah.
Steel and concrete. This wasn't some flimsy jury-rigged defense then.
Not at all. This was a serious piece of engineering covering the entire cabin, the engine compartment, even parts of the tracks.
How did he even build it?
Well, he apparently used a crane, another substantial piece of equipment he managed to keep hidden, to carefully lower the final armored shell over the bulldozer's chassis.
Incredible.
The design was specifically intended to withstand small arms fire, and tragically, it proved to be terrifyingly effective against the local police.
He seemed to have anticipated almost every contingency. Multiple video cameras encased in bulletproof plastic.
Right, feeding live images to monitors inside the sealed cab, giving him a 360-degree view.
Compressed air nozzles to clear dust from the lenses. Air conditioning, fans.
Yeah, rudimentary AC and ventilation to survive inside this airtight metal box. And then, of course, the strategically placed firing ports for at least 3 different firearms.
And he provisioned it like he was preparing for a siege. Pistols, rifles, a gas mask.
Food, water, even beer, apparently. Enough to last him for days, if that had been his intention.
But the truly critical detail here, and something we can't overlook, once that final piece of armor was welded or bolted into place, there was absolutely no way out.
None.
He'd effectively sealed himself inside this metal tomb. This wasn't just an act of destruction. It was a suicide mission from the very beginning.
The level of planning, the almost perverse ingenuity that went into building this machine, even directed towards such a destructive end, it's really quite astonishing. It speaks to a deep and unwavering resolve, however twisted or misguided it may have been.
So, June 4th, 2004, around 2:15 p.m.
Yeah. The unthinkable happens. The Killdozer, as the world would soon know it, doesn't just drive out of the shop. It smashes through the concrete wall in a dramatic and forceful exit.
And its first target is exactly who you'd expect after everything we've discussed. Mountain Park Concrete.
Right. He methodically went about demolishing the entire plant, systematically targeting buildings, equipment.
The owner, Cody Doshev, he was actually there.
Yeah, on site, desperately tried to intervene, even firing a handgun at the armored machine, attempting to ram it with other heavy construction equipment.
But against that armor.
Completely futile. Heemeyer, protected inside his steel shell, fired back from his gun ports.
Wow. So the police show up.
The local law enforcement, the sheriff's department, were on the scene incredibly quickly, but they were woefully unprepared for what they encountered.
Their guns just...
Completely ineffective. Bullets just ricocheted harmlessly off the Killdozer's armor. Heemeyer even chased sheriff's deputies, rammed and destroyed several of their patrol cars.
Chase them. Good grief.
In a desperate attempt to disable the behemoth, one deputy actually managed to climb on top and drop a flashbang grenade down the exhaust stack.
Did it work?
No. Again, it seems Heemeyer had thought of this. He had installed some kind of grate or barrier in the exhaust system to prevent anything like that from getting into the engine.
Unbelievable.
The machine just kept rumbling on, seemingly impervious, having completely flattened the concrete plant.
The source of his initial anger.
Right. Marvin Heemeyer then steered his armored vehicle towards the town of Granby itself. Understandably, at this point, widespread panic began to set in.
I can only imagine. This monster heading for town.
As this monstrous machine lumbered into the heart of Granby, the sense of terror must have been palpable. Evacuation orders were rapidly issued.
Where do you go next?
His next target was the Granby Town Hall. And in a chilling near miss, there was a children's program taking place in the library there.
Oh, no.
And they were evacuated just minutes before the Killdozer slammed into the building. That close call really brings home the potential for even greater tragedy.
That detail about the children, it's genuinely disturbing. While his primary targets seemed to be specific buildings and individuals he felt had wronged him.
Yeah, investigators later found a list, right? Over 100 names of people and businesses he apparently blamed.
Right. But the indiscriminate destructive power of this machine meant that innocent bystanders were constantly in grave danger.
Absolutely. After Town Hall, he continued his destructive path. Targeted the Liberty Savings Bank, the local newspaper office, ironically, the very paper that had previously criticized him.
Huh. Poetic injustice, almost.
Even the home of the former mayor, who had actually passed away some time before. He went after various other properties that were seemingly on his list, tearing down utility poles, trees, causing widespread chaos and significant property damage.
Was he shooting at people?
It appears not directly. He did fire shots from his weapons, but it seems his primary goal was the destruction of property, the symbols of the entities he blamed.
But then comes what is perhaps the most terrifying moment in this whole sequence. He drove the Killdozer directly towards a propane storage facility.
Yes. Massive tanks containing thousands of gallons of highly flammable gas, enough to cause a catastrophic explosion.
And he started shooting at them.
He began firing at these tanks, as well as nearby electrical transformers. The potential for utter devastation was immense. The intent there seems terrifyingly clear, to trigger a massive explosion that could have leveled a significant portion of Granby.
Good Lord, that's unthinkable.
The situation was so critical, so potentially disastrous, that the governor of Colorado actually considered authorizing a National Guard airstrike.
An airstrike? With what?
There was serious discussion about deploying an Apache helicopter armed with anti-tank missiles.
Wow. Against the Killdozer.
Yeah. Ultimately, they made the difficult decision not to proceed. The potential for even greater collateral damage from an air-launched missile in a populated area was simply too high.
Thank goodness. So he didn't manage to ignite the propane.
Incredibly, no. He was unsuccessful. The rampage finally came to an unexpected end when he attacked the Gamble's hardware store.
The hardware store? What happened there?
It was there, almost anticlimactically, that the Killdozer finally met its match. Not through any direct assault, but through a structural vulnerability. The sheer weight of the machine.
Too heavy.
Exactly. Caused its tracks to break through the floor of the hardware store, and the massive vehicle sank into the basement, finally immobilizing it. There's also some speculation the radiator might have been damaged earlier, perhaps by a lucky shot, which could have contributed.
So it got stuck. Then what?
With the Killdozer finally stopped, SWAT teams quickly converged on the location. Shortly after, a single, muffled gunshot was heard from inside the armored cabin.
He killed himself.
Marvin Heemeyer had taken his own life. It took law enforcement hours, they had to use explosives, and eventually a cutting torch to breach the heavily armored machine and reach his body.
Because there was no way out.
Exactly. Inside, they confirmed what the design had indicated all along.
In the end, he had caused an estimated $7 million in damage. 13 buildings damaged or destroyed.
And it's just truly remarkable, almost unbelievable that he was the only person who died that day.
Just miraculous, given the circumstances. What happened in Granby afterwards?
Well, in the immediate aftermath, the concrete plant was able to resume operations relatively quickly. Insurance covered most of the extensive damages. The town eventually rebuilt. Locally, Heemeyer is largely remembered, understandably, in a negative light as a stubborn and ultimately destructive figure who terrorized their community.
But as we touched on earlier, that's not the end of the story, is it?
No, not really. In the 2010s, his narrative experienced this really significant resurgence online. It started with internet memes, but it gradually evolved into something far more complex and, in some ways, more troubling. He became a potent symbol for certain online communities.
He became this almost mythical figurehead, right? For various online groups, libertarians railing against government overreach, anti-government extremists, elements within the alt-right.
Yeah, his actions, no matter how extreme and violent, were reinterpreted as a kind of righteous rebellion, a desperate act of defiance against perceived corruption and bureaucratic tyranny.
He transformed into this symbol of the perceived little guy, finally striking back against a system they believe is fundamentally rigged.
Yeah.
What aspects of his story do you think resonated so strongly with these groups?
Well, it's fascinating how his individual grievances, the land dispute, the perceived harassment by local authorities align with the broader anxieties and narratives of these groups. They often feel marginalized, unheard, and believe they are fighting against an oppressive system.
Right.
Heemeyer's dramatic and destructive response, however misguided, becomes a kind of extreme wish fulfillment for those who feel powerless. The image of this seemingly unstoppable force taking on the establishment becomes a powerful, albeit deeply problematic, symbol of resistance.
And this is where the connection to groups like the Boogaloo Bois becomes relevant. Their adoption of tactical gear and those distinctive Hawaiian shirts.
Yeah, seen by some as a potential, albeit often coded, nod to figures like Heemeyer. Within their ideology, which often centers around anti-government sentiment and the anticipation or even desire for a second American Civil War,
Scary stuff.
he's become this almost revered figure, a Saint Marvin, a martyr who took drastic action against what he perceived as tyranny.
That quote of his, "Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things," found in his writings.
Exactly. That's been widely circulated and adopted as a kind of rallying cry within these online circles. It's a chilling justification for extreme action.
There was that really disturbing example. A Boogaloo adherent accused of killing law enforcement officers reportedly scrawled, "I became unreasonable," in blood before his arrest.
Yes, directly referencing Heemeyer's sentiment. It really underscores the dangerous potential of these narratives to radicalize individuals.
It truly highlights the very real danger of how these complex and tragic stories can be so easily twisted, amplified, and ultimately weaponized within certain online communities.
Heemeyer himself left behind audio tapes attempting to rationalize his actions, framing them within a context of divine will.
And the Killdozer itself, what happened to it?
In a deliberate effort to prevent it from becoming some kind of morbid shrine or pilgrimage site, it was eventually dismantled into small pieces and dispersed to various scrapyards. Gone.
So as we try to piece together this incredibly complex and deeply unsettling event, the fundamental questions remain. Was Marvin Heemeyer simply a man pushed beyond his breaking point, a victim of circumstance who felt utterly wronged?
Or was he a paranoid individual who meticulously planned and executed a terrifying act of violence and destruction? And perhaps more disturbingly, what does his transformation into a folk hero for certain groups in the digital age tell us about the anxieties and frustrations present in society today?
And that's the crucial question we want to pose to you, listening. After hearing all of this, what do you make of Marvin Heemeyer's story? It's a narrative with so many intricate and troubling layers.
Yeah.
Questions surrounding property rights and local governance, the critical issue of mental health, the devastating consequences of community conflict, and the undeniable and increasingly powerful role of online narratives in shaping how we understand and interpret such events, even years later.
We genuinely encourage you to share your perspectives on this. Head over to our website or connect with us on social media. You'll find all the necessary links in the show notes and let us know your thoughts. This is a story that sparks a lot of debate, and we're really interested in hearing what you take away from it.
It truly is a story that forces you to stop and think. Consider this.
Where do you believe the line lies between a deeply felt sense of justified grievance and an act of utterly destructive violence? And in our hyper-connected digital world, how can the individual stories of those who feel wronged be so easily twisted, amplified, and repurposed to fuel much broader and sometimes incredibly dangerous ideological movements? It's a lot to consider. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.